Hey everyone, and welcome to Fright Night. Are you ready for another chilling urban legend? A young girl home alone in a quiet neighborhood, something lurking in the darkness outside of her window, and one fearless dog. Of all of the world's most famous urban legends, this classic might just be amongst my all-time favorites. Are you sure you're brave enough for man's best friend? Megan was not your average 12-year-old. Having just entered 6th grade, she'd maintained perfect A's her entire life and was already part of her school's junior honors program. While other gals her age were focusing on flirting with boys, Megan dreamed of graduating early at the top of her high school class in 5 years, maybe sooner, and of moving on to college, where she would aim for a PhD. She was never late to school, never stayed out longer than her parents wished her to, and she finished all of her chores as quickly and thoroughly as she could. Right now, however, Megan was sick and bedridden in her second-story room. She'd had a fever of just over 101 for the past 3 days or so, and the little overachiever was going stir-crazy. But her spirits weren't entirely down in the dumps, because the entire time, her dog Max had kept her company. When Megan had turned 8 years old, her parents had adopted Max as an unknown breed, and since then, he'd grown into some form of large mixed wolf that weighed nearly 150 pounds. While he was technically a family dog, he was bonded to Megan, and whenever there was trouble around her, Max was there in a flash. They were so close, they even shared their own unique form of communication. See, every night Max would sleep under Megan's bed. If she was ever scared, she'd reach her hand down, and if everything was alright, Max would give her hand a gentle lick. Adversely, the few times something had been wrong, he'd given her a soft bite. Megan slept most of the day away, but she was awakened later right around sundown by a knock on her door. It was her parents. "Hey honey," said her mother in a comforting tone. "How are you feeling?" "Still pretty sick," replied Megan, "but it's not as bad as the first few days. I think I'm getting close to getting better." "That's great," said her father. "Listen, could we ask you a huge favor?" "Sure," replied Megan. "Anything." "Well, we've been so busy working that we almost forgot that tonight is our anniversary," he explained. "We were hoping we could sneak out for just a few hours for a date, and your sister will be here the whole time. Would you be okay with that?" Megan considered her older sister Becky. She was 18 and a polar opposite to Megan. Becky broke the rules, dated older guys, snuck out to parties, and had just barely scraped by with below average grades. In other words, not the best choice of babysitter, but she'd thought about her father's request and reminded herself that she'd have Max if anything went wrong. "Of course, Dad," she said, smiling. "You guys go have fun. I'll be just fine." "Great, honey," replied her mother. "Get some rest, okay?" They hugged Megan goodbye and then exited her room, after which she fell into an uneasy sleep filled with strange fever dreams. She dreamt her door opened and then closed and then opened again. She dreamt of footsteps outside in the hallway, and just as she was trying to make sense of these dreams, she was awakened by the sound of a car door. She could hear her parents' voices cheerfully chatting just below her window, could hear the familiar sound of their car's engine, and could just make out as they sped off into the night. Megan was slightly nervous, so she reached down, and Max, faithful as always, gave a small groan and then gave her hand a lick, and slowly she nodded off to sleep. Again, her dreams were wild. She watched frozen in bed as her door opened slowly, slammed shut, and then opened again. Suddenly, she was awakened once more, this time by her sister's sharp voice. Becky had entered her room and was approaching her bed. "Hey," she started. "Listen, I have a big request. Can I please sneak out with my boyfriend Dave for a few minutes? We never get to see each other, and I'll be back way before Mom and Dad are. Please, 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 please." Megan didn't feel all too comfortable with this request, but she reached down and Max licked her hand, as if to let her know he'd be watching after her. "Okay," replied Megan, "but please don't be gone for too long. I feel pretty sick still, and I don't really want to be here alone." "You're the best," said Becky excitedly. "I promise I'll be back before you know it." Becky half ran from the room, and Megan fell back into an uneasy sleep. Once again, she had strange dreams that her door was opening and closing, then opening and closing again. But this time, she swore through the fog of slumber that there was a silhouette in the doorway. Just as she was focusing on this figure, however, she was awakened by raised voices downstairs. Though she couldn't really make out any words from so far away, the tone and pitch of one of the voices was obviously a very annoyed Becky, and it sounded like she was arguing with Dave. Suddenly, there was a loud crash like something breaking. Megan sat bolt upright in the darkness. She began to shake, but things quickly quieted down, and once they had, she reached under her bed and Max, who was also used to Becky's shenanigans, gave her hand a lick. Though it took a little longer, Megan drifted slowly back into an uneasy sleep, and once again, her dreams were filled with strange imagery of her door opening and closing again. She thought she saw someone looking in her window, which was impossible, as there was a story-high drop just outside, and even thought she felt her blankets being pulled from her body. But just as she was hoping to wake up, she was brought to consciousness by a strange sound. It was a rhythmic commotion, and consisted of 2 thuds followed by an odd sliding sound. Chillingly, at first, this sound seemed to originate from somewhere downstairs, but as she listened, it slowly ascended the stairs, and before she knew it, it was in the hallway outside of her door, getting closer and closer. Megan was really scared now. She began to cry, but when she reached down for Max, though it took a second, he still licked her hand. She trusted Max, and as terrified as she was, she forced herself to lay down and eventually cried herself back to sleep. Before she could experience any strange dreams, however, she was awakened one final time. Her bedroom door splintered and exploded inwards as police rushed the room. "Are you Megan Jones?" asked one of the officers. "Yes," answered Megan. "What's happening? I don't understand." The officer picked her up and began rushing her out of the room. "I need you to keep your eyes closed, okay?" he asked. "Don't open them under any circumstances." But before Megan could close her eyes, she spotted something in the hallway. It was the slumped-over body of her sister, who had been cut so deeply across the stomach with a knife that she was nearly in half, and had left a trail of blood and unimaginable gore behind her as she'd tried to make it to Megan's room. Megan began to cry. Her eyes were so teared up, in fact, that as she descended the stairs, she almost didn't notice another form tucked away behind the couch. It was the body of Max, who was surrounded by shattered ceramic from a lamp that had been crushed over his head. "That's impossible," Megan wailed. "He was just upstairs under my bed licking my hand." To which the officer replied, "Ma'am, humans can lick too." A chilling tale, isn't it? But where did it come from, and is there any truth to it? Contrary to other popular urban legends I've covered in the past, Man's Best Friend, which has also been titled as The Licked Hand or Humans Can Lick Too, is much newer than the golden age of urban legend creation, which is generally considered to be the 1920s to 1940s. While it's difficult to pinpoint where its roots lie, most folklorists agree that this popular fable was born sometime through the 1960s to 70s, during a growth era in the popularity of such stories. And in all honesty, it was likely originally told by one lone, unsung parent and passed down orally to friends, siblings, and through the generations until it gained the massive traction it boasts today. One of the earliest documented versions of the licked hand was collected on April 4th of 1970 in Vigo County, Indiana, by the Indiana State University Folklore Archives. And the fact that it follows our modern rendition and that at the time the story was known by a large portion of the populace tells us that it was likely in circulation long before this date. On a related side note, stories in which young women who are home alone and mistake an intruder for something more benign have been told since the early 1870s or so. But as these tales don't involve a dog or licked appendage, they're more just spiritual ancestors to the tale at hand. No pun intended. Through the rest of the 1970s and into the 80s, the licked hand would spread like wildfire across the US, and was popular namely due to its unique twist which surprised listeners and sent chills down the spines of even the bravest. It would quickly grow into a fixture amongst sleepovers, campfires, and youth gatherings. In 1982, it was featured in Ronald L. Baker's book, Who's Your Folk Legends? And in 1884, it would gain a massive boost in fame after it was featured in the master of urban legends, Jan Harold Brunvand's book, The Choking Doberman and Other New Urban Legends. Brunvand, ever the scholar, would break the legend down at an academic level. He would even revisit this tale in his 1989 book, Curses Broiled Again, and later, in 2001, in his infinitely famous Encyclopedia of Urban Legends. The 1990s would see the story move from folklore into mass entertainment, as it was adapted for the 1997 horror anthology Campfire Tales, which, again guys, if you haven't seen it and love urban legends, all I can really say is it's one of my favorite nostalgic scary movies ever. It's an absolute classic and touches on many of the stories I rewrite for you guys every day. So check it out. Subsequently, it was also featured in an October 1998 episode of Freaky Stories, and in 2001 in the Urban Legends sequel, Urban Legends Final Cut. More recently, the popular 2004 series The L Word would offer its own adaptation to the licked hand, as would the legendary 2005 series Supernatural, and it would resurface once again in Crypt TV's short film adaptations, which were shared online through the mid-2010s. Like many urban legends, man's best friend is usually told as a cautionary tale, and though its actual in-story twist is wonderfully chilling, it actually hides another twist in its very composition, which many of you probably noticed subconsciously, even if you couldn't put words to it. Usually, the cautionary element of urban legends pertains to the main characters making bad decisions. What makes the licked hand so odd in this regard is that it's more of a cautionary tale to parents or older siblings, and through the innocent victim's perspective, warns of the dangers of leaving your child or younger brother or sister home alone when you could be watching them. The protagonist in danger here, or Megan, in our story, has done nothing wrong, unless you consider her decision to let her older sister sneak out. But that theory's pretty thin, as her older sister is usually described as being an adult, and there's no real emphasis on her not being allowed to go visit a boyfriend. Megan gets good marks in school, does her chores, is responsible, and honestly, that only makes it that much creepier. It suggests that even if we're doing everything right, we could still become the target of a vicious, unseen killer. As far as ties to reality go, this one's pretty murky. Throughout history, countless home invasions have ended in brutal murders, and in many of these cases, family pets, especially dogs, have been found dead with their owners. What really transpired between the killer or killers and their victim or victims, and any pets on scene, remains a mystery cloaked by death. But considering such crimes and their frequency, it wouldn't be hard to chalk this one up as somewhat or likely true. So when night falls and you're feeling safe relaxing with your faithful furry companion, there's a reason that humans are the most dangerous animals. Don't leave your children alone, check your doors and windows, and don't pass off that scratching noise as your dog wanting to come back in. Take precautions, implement security measures, and always remember that humans can lick too.